chapter 14, verse 1, it says, Banim atem Hashem Elokechem. You are children to Hashem your God. Lotus go to do, you're not allowed to, we're going to translate this literally. Lotus go to do means to cut yourself. And when someone dies, you can't make a bald spot between your eyes. And even to this day, in some societies, there is this self-mutilation that goes on as part of the mourning process. But we're being taught here that you're not allowed to make mutilations on yourself because you're children of God. But Rashi tells us it means something else. Lotit go to do, lotit nu gedida viseret bivserchem. Do not make a cutting or a scratching in your flesh, al mate, for a dead person. Kederach shamoraim osuyin, like the Amorites used to do. Meaning to say the Amorites, as part of their mourning process, they would make these marks in their body.
There are some versions of Muslims who still do it.
I'm sure.
Ashura is a holiday in which they mutilate themselves mourning for Muhammad, but they come with knives and things and they bleed all over them.
Well, there are Christians who do it too.
There are Christians.
And there are Jews who do it also.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, they're not supposed to, but they do, for sure. And you were supposed to be handsome and not cut or bald.
Be careful
Hey,
where
bald-
you
bald
go.
is
Be
like-
careful where you go.
No, meaning to say intentionally bald.
Yeah, okay.
Between your eyes, eitzah padachas, next to the forehead. Another place says, should not make a bald spot on their heads. So it's called rosh kebein, can't make the entire head like between the eyes. Kiam kadoshata, because you are a holy people. Kedushas atzmecha me'avosecha. Your holiness comes from your Father. The holiness of yourself comes from your Father. And Hashem has chosen you. Okay, let's see the next verse. Because you are a holy nation, because you're a holy nation before Hashem your God. And for you Hashem has chosen to be for him for a treasured people from all the nations on the earth. So the two reasons why you can't make the marks is because you have this legacy from your fathers that you're holy, and because Hashem chose you.
You're people of distinction.
Right, we're people of distinction.
So you're not distinguished if you cut yourself.
And it's no tattoos.
That's true.
This is the source for the idea of no tattoos. Comes from here. What did go to do? Do not make these cuts on yourselves. It's the source. What about these tattoos that are not permanent? So there's no prohibition against that.
You're not mutilating yourself.
You're not mutilating. Not mutilating.
And a tax.
And a tattoo.
So then it states, verse 3, Lo tochal kol to'eva. You are not allowed to eat any abomination. And now we're going to go into the, oh, hold on. We have Rabbi Yosef has joined. I didn't even see him. Let's make him the co-host. Chapter 14, verse 3. You're not allowed to eat any abomination. And now the Torah is going to tell us these prohibitions. Hold on. Hold on. Okay, so now we're going to go into all those animals which are prohibited to be eaten. Lo tochal kol toeva. Can't eat any abomination. Rashi says, kol shetiavti lecha, anything that I made abominable for you, you can't eat. Could go in, for example, saram ozen bechor. If you intentionally slit the ear of a firstborn animal, kedei l'shachto b'medina. So we have a problem. Why are these foods called abominations? So Rashi says that these non-kosher animals are not called abominations. What he's calling the toeva are those things which Hashem said you can't slaughter an animal, and you intentionally make the animal, you mutilate the animal in order to get a loophole. So the example Rashi gives is there's a firstborn animal, and the law of a firstborn animal is you have to give it to the Kohen. And the Kohen has to either has to sacrifice the animal as a sacrifice and offering to God, or if the animal gets a blemish on it, then he could slaughter it on his own and eat it. But if he makes the blemish that on the animal in order to evade having to sacrifice it in the temple, that's called an abomination. Then he can't eat it. That's what Rashi says. For example, Tsarim Ozen before, if he intentionally slits the ear of a firstborn animal, Kedei l'shachto b'medina, in order to be allowed to slaughter in the country, alright, davar shetiavti lach kol mumul yebo, something that I made abominable for you, there should not be any blemish in it. That he cannot slaughter and eat on account of that blemish. So if he makes that blemish, then he can't eat the animal. So too, the Torah says you can't eat meat and milk. Let's say you cook the meat and milk together. That's davar shetiavti lach, that I made this abominable to you. Is your kan al chilasa. The Torah is telling us that you can't eat it. We know you're not allowed to. So we see from here that you're not allowed. We know that you're already not allowed to cook meat and milk, but here you're not allowed to eat meat and milk that's cooked together. That's what Rashi says. And now the Torah is going to list all the animals which you're not allowed to eat. First list the animals that you can eat. There's not so many animals. You think that there's so many animals you can eat. It's actually not so many. Shor, sak, savim, v'se'izim. You have an ox. We call that, usually we call that today a bull or a cow.
That's all a general name for cattle.
Cattle. Se, which is ksavim, which is sheep, v'se'izim, and goats. So, what do you mean by cattle, Rabbi Yosef? Because it's not referring to buffalo here. It's referring to like what we call the bull or the ox.
Yeah, I'm saying the domesticated animals.
The domesticated bovine, whatever, the domesticated ox. That's what it's referring to.
Yeah, but sure wouldn't be appropriate for a cow because a cow is female. So I'm saying that I think that's what the Torah just means, one general word for.
Exactly. Means the male and female of the male is the bull and the female is the cow, and we call it an ox in general. So Zos verse 4. Zos Abahema, and then the next verse states, Ayu Tzvi v'yachmur v'ako v'dishonu te'ova zemer. These are the other animals that you can eat. The ayil. Now, what's an ayil? The ayil is usually like a deer, and the tzvi is usually a gazelle. But I see here in my translation they call it a hart. You know what a hart is? What's a hart?
It's
a deer.
It's like a deer.
Yeah, a deer. What's the difference?
I don't know if there is a difference.
So why do they call it a hart here?
They all have split hooves.
They all do, but what's the difference between a deer and a hart? Anyway,
I think it's the same animal.
but there's two different animals. Here, A tzvi is usually translated as a gazelle, and here they translate it as a deer. And ayo and a tzvi. And the
The proper word in Hebrew for reindeer is ayal. So
okay.
we're going to eat what's their names? All the Christmas animals.
And then there is a yachmor, va'akov v'dishon uta'o v'zemer. So these animals are harder to identify. What does Rashi say? Lamanu shachaya b'kol behema, v'lamanu shebehema v'chaya tameya meruba min haTorah. Sheb'kol makom karata samuat. So Rashi says we learn from here that a chaya, which is an undomesticated animal, is included within the term for domesticated animals, because the animals we're saying now are what's called the undomesticated animals. So when we say behema, it's a general classification that includes domestic and undomesticated animals. So, and that's what Rashi proves here now. Shebehema v'chaya tameya. And we also know, Rashi says, that the non-kosher animals clearly are greater than the kosher ones. Because the Torah is only listing the kosher animals, so clearly the non-kosher animals are much greater, because otherwise we would have listed the ones that are unusual. Uta'o, what's the ta'o? Rashi says that the ta'o is the torbala, which means tor hayar, the ox of the forest. That's also called a, oh, excuse me, I skipped to Rashi first. The Akko, what's the Akko? Meturgum Ya'ala, Ya'alei Salah, ibexes of the rock. It's called an Steinbock in French. This is called a wild goat. So this is the ibex, really. And then there's the Shor Abor, the wild ox, or the Torbala, the ox of the forest. And that is, anybody know what that looks like? The wild ox?
Buffalo or the jamus.
The jamus? I never even heard of that.
Jamus is the Arabic name for the buffalo. It used to live in the Hula swamp.
Gotcha. Okay.
The achmur is, according to the Canadian rabbis, is the moose. And there used to be a restaurant in New Jersey that served moose, but they're big animals and you have to trap them. You're not allowed to hunt them. So
okay. So then the kol behema, but the Torah tells us you don't need to know which animal. This is not going to be the case for all kosher animals, but as it relates to the domesticated and the undomesticated animals that walk on 4 feet, those animals, you don't need to know specifically that the Torah says that this animal is kosher, because you have the identifying features. And as long as it has these identifying features, it's kosher. What is that? Kol behema mafresis parsa v'shosas shesa. Any animal that has split hooves, that has a hoof, which is shosas shesa, which is completely split into 2 hooves. So it has a hoof, which is completely split into 2 parts. And also malas gera babehema, and also it is chewing its cud amongst the animals. Osa tochel, that you can eat. So in order for an animal to be kosher, it has to have completely split hooves, and also it has to chew its cud. Rashi says, mafresis is seduka, split. Parsa, planta, means a hoof.
So no camel burgers.
Camel does not have completely split hooves. It's partially split. So if you go to Saudi Arabia, a big thing they sell there is camel milk. Not kosher. Everything has camel milk in it. Seriously, like you try this.
Why would the milk be counted as not kosher?
It's because that's a good question, because it's considered everything that comes from an animal that's not kosher is not kosher, and everything that comes from a kosher animal that's kosher is kosher. With the exception of the only thing that comes from a non-kosher animal that's kosher is the honey from a bee. But so that's the only difference.
Can't do bees.
Bees are not kosher, but the bee honey is kosher
Why is the bee not kosher?
because the bee. The only things, as we'll see in this paragraph, that there's different categories. There's the creatures that fly,
Right.
the creatures that are like creepy crawly creatures, and the creatures that are domesticated animals, and the creatures that are fish. And so therefore, it can only be kosher if it fits into one of those categories. And it's not one of the kosher animals that fly, it's not one of the kosher animals that have that are creepy crawly, and it's not one of the fishes in the sea.
So how did the honey get to be kosher?
So Gemara discusses that question. The Gemara cites a verse that the honey is kosher, even though the bee is not kosher. Forget the exact verse, but the Gemara in Chulin, I believe in Chulin, discusses that.
Because it's not an actual produce of her body. She
Right,
chews it
yeah.
and spits it
But
out.
the Gemara cites a verse. We have to look that up, but we'll cite the verse.
That'll be Samson.
What?
Samson found a beehive in the mouth of the lion.
In the mouth of the carcass of the lion, and he ate it. That's true. So amongst the animals you can eat this. Babahema, amongst the animals, mashma nimtza babahema achol, that which is found in the animals. Oh, excuse me, I skipped to Rashi. Vishosas, it has to be separated into two parts. Chaluka b'shtei tzipornaim, it's divided into two nails. Sheyesh seduka ve'ina chaluka b'tzornaim, because there are some who are split, but not completely. V'hi tamei, and that's not kosher. So that's like a camel, it's partially split. Babahema, amongst the animals, that which is found in the animal itself, you can eat. Mikan amrusha shalil nitar b'shlitas imo. So this teaches us that a fetus becomes permitted once the mother is slaughtered. This is called the law of the ben pekua. The animal inside the animal, anything that's inside the animal you could eat. So let's say you slaughter a sheep or a cow, and inside it you find a fully developed fetus, which walks on its own right after you slaughter the mother. That animal does not require slaughtering, and you can eat it without slaughter. It's automatically kosher. It's like it's a dead man walking.
You can't eat it if you don't slaughter it either.
Yeah, you can.
How are you gonna eat it?
Well, slaughtering is a very specific ritual way of killing it. Yeah, well, let's say you just hit it over the head with a hammer, it would still be kosher. This is called the ben pekua. And also relevant is that you can eat the hind, the sciatic nerve, the gid anasha. Now, the actual gid anasha you don't really want to eat because nobody wants to eat the sciatic nerve. But that gid anasha makes the process of removing it from the hind quarter of the animal very labor intensive, which is why the Jews don't eat that part of the animal. But if you have ben pekua farm, then you can eat the hinds. So ben pekua, this animal that comes forth, if it's a female and it mates with a male, then their offspring are considered to also not require the slaughter forever. And so you could have an entire ben pekua farm. And that's what they're doing now. That's what they're developing, these farms. And then you wouldn't have to slaughter those animals. Now you would still slaughter it rabbinically, but if there was a problem with the slaughter, it would make it much more lenient. But when they started doing this was cutting edge technology. But now it's already passé because now they're making the meat in the labs and you don't even need slaughter on those meats at all. You're not even killing the animal. You're just growing the culture, and you're growing the beef, so to speak. And that would make this, I guess, this whole part of the Torah, technically speaking, irrelevant, because all of these animals, which we say are prohibited, there's a very strong argument to make that if you just grow it in the lab, it's not that animal and it's kosher. So you could grow a pig in your lab and then it will be kosher. The piece of ham, you're not growing the whole animal, just growing a piece of a ham. Now, not everybody's going to say it's kosher, but even those people who say it's not kosher, they're going to come up with like reasons beyond the law why it's not kosher. Whereas technically speaking, though, it's kosher. I mean, you have a hard argument it's very hard to argue that it's really not kosher because it's not, it was never alive.
But where did they get the material to culture?
So they can get it even from like a cell of like from a feather, or maybe like, but that thing is not prohibited to eat. That cell it's not food, so it's not prohibited. So that's the argument about why we should be strict and say it's prohibited. But technically speaking, because the Talmud says if something becomes dry like wood, it loses its status as not kosher. It's like this tablecloth is not, it's not non-kosher.
It gets tricky when you're talking about replacing heart valves with pig's valves.
Well, that's for sure okay. I feel like I cut your shine off, I'm sorry. But there's for sure okay to have a human being have a pig valve in their heart. There's no prohibition about that whatsoever. That is for sure okay. Did I cut you off, Shoshana? I'm sorry.
No, I was just thinking that you said before that everything that comes from a kosher animal is kosher, everything that comes from a non-kosher
Right.
animal is not kosher. So even if you get down to the cell level,
Yeah.
they seem to be.
So I said two things that are contradictory. You're right. So I have to revise that statement. I'm saying all the food items that come from a non-kosher animal are non-kosher, but this is not a food item. This is just something that's not edible. And so and you're just creating it yourself. It's almost messianic, this idea, because the Talmud, the Zohar talked about in the time of the Messiah, pig will then become kosher. And here we're creating these animals, and the Talmud talks about animals that were created by rabbis. And when for 2,000 years, when people read these texts, they thought this is the most ridiculous thing in the world, that a pig is going to be kosher, the rabbis are going to create, like through magical means, a kosher sheep. But we see from here today, it's very clear. And not only that, these animals would in all likelihood, by the letter of the law, I'm not saying that you're going to be able to get away with this, but by the letter of the law, these animals, excuse me, would probably not be considered fleishik. They're probably considered parv, and therefore you'd be able to eat a kosher cheeseburger. Now, I'm not saying that any rabbi is going to really technically argue that, but I'm saying that that's probably the technical law. But in practical speaking, the rabbis will be concerned about other issues, about maybe forgetting the laws of kashrut, about then, like people don't understand what you're doing, and people think that you're eating cheeseburger. But anyway, yes, Rabbi Yosef.
I wanted to ask if maybe it's not, even though it's kasher ka'etz, maybe it's ma'amid, like gelatin. Gelatin doesn't have any taste of pig anymore.
Right. So there is arguments.
The whole
to be
basis
made,
for this is a cell.
Right. So there are arguments to be made, but the point is that you can make arguments about why it's prohibited, but that really technically by the letter of the law, it seems like it's not prohibited. But then you find all different reasons. You can always find, come up with different reasons to be strict, because the rabbis are going to be very uncomfortable, generally speaking, undoing 2,000 years of Jewish practice of not eating pork, of not eating meat and milk together. But at the same time, the flip side is, listen, when we started having these plant-based meats, people also are like feeling uncomfortable when they taste like pork and taste like chicken, and then you put it with your milk. But people got used to it. You have to adapt. So anyway, this will be the next frontier of kosher technology over the next 20 years, for sure. Yeah.
Goldberg's Deli has kosher cheeseburger.
Yeah, I mean, they say they're the first, but that's just, everybody does that, like all these stores, all the kosher stores, like they,
It's funny to see.
yeah, they're marketing, right? Yeah, Goldberg's does that, yeah, first kosher cheeseburger.
First kosher cheeseburger, come and get it.
By the way, I don't know why I did this, around 20 years ago, I did trademark the name Kosher Pig. Yeah, I own that trademark, the Kosher Pig. So, and
May soon be able to do something.
yeah, I'm sure I will, and I'm not gonna enforce it, like if, I can't imagine like I'm gonna, but I did have that foresight to be able to do that. Okay, so the Talmud says, so the Torah says, hey, Benjamin, welcome. Well, all right, so we'll just finish this verse, and then it says one more pasuk, and then we'll stop. So these animals you cannot eat from those that chew their cud, but their hooves are split, but they're not completely split. We'll see. At Gamal, the camel, the arnevet, which is the hare, shafan, the rabbit, they chew their cud, ufarsalo ufrisu, but their hooves are not completely split. They're considered to be not kosher for you. Rashi says, Ashesua biryahi. What is these animals that have split hooves? First is the shesua. Rashi says it's a creature, which has two backs and two backbones. Now this is very interesting. For years, people weren't able to identify this. For many, many years, people were not able to identify what is this kosher animal, this non-kosher animal that has two backs and two backbones. And recently they found it, they discovered it.
Really?
Yeah. They really, look it up. I forgot what it's called. Two back, yeah, there's like it looks like a little like a weasel. Look it up. The animal with two backbones. Here, I'll just look it up. Animal with two backbones. And two, what's the other thing? Two backbones and two backs. There is, you'll see. And it's amazing how the rabbis knew about it because it was nowhere near them. Okay, hold on, let me just do this. Here, animal, 15 animals.
I don't understand about chickens.
Hold on, an animal with two backbones.
They don't talk. Not a bird.
Chickens, oh, but there have been spotted chickens that have been flying.
Well,
They're foul, right? Here, oh, no, that's no.
The turkeys that don't fly. The turkeys that do, but they're turkeys that don't.
That's turkey's fun.
Eagles don't fly.
Okay, I can't find it right now, but there is, when I remember seeing it in one of the books by the rabbis. Oh, here we go. There's a two-humped, no, that's not it. You'll find it, Steve. You'll find it when you look for it.
Okay.
For some reason, I can't find it now. All right, we'll stop the recording here and we'll daven mincha.